Imagine walking into a McDonald's in 1974. There are no digital screens, no apps, and no calorie counts. Instead, the air is thick with a smell you haven't encountered in decades, a rich, savory aroma that modern fast food simply cannot replicate. You sit down at a plastic booth next to a small metal ashtray, unwrap a burger from thin wax paper, and take a bite of a fry that tastes different. It's deeper. It's richer. Everyone says food tasted better back then, but was it just the nostalgia talking? Actually, no. There is a specific, forgotten ingredient that disappeared in the 90s that made 1970s fast food objectively superior. Today, we're going back to the era of 30-cent burgers and frosted root beer mugs to uncover why 1970s fast food was the gold standard and what we lost when the industry changed forever. By the early 1970s, the American landscape was changing at breakneck speed. New suburbs were popping up like mushrooms after rain. Highways were becoming the arteries of the country, and those big roadside signs, the Golden Arches, the Burger King crown, the Colonel's face, were becoming the new landmarks of the American dream. Fast food wasn't a novelty anymore, but it hadn't yet turned into the cold, automated machine we know today. In the early 70s, eating out was becoming a weekly routine. It was the reward after a Little League game, the destination after Sunday church, or the salvation during a long cross-country drive in a station wagon with no air conditioning. But here's the thing, it felt smaller. The menus weren't overwhelming. You didn't have to scroll through 10 pages of specialty wraps or plant-based alternatives. You walked up to a counter, looked at a simple board, and made your choice in seconds. It was a world of simplicity, and that simplicity started with the most famous menu in history. Walk into a McDonald's in 1972, and you were greeted by a menu that was remarkably focused. Hamburger, cheeseburger, Big Mac, fries, shake. That was essentially the list. The Big Mac had gone nationwide just a few years earlier, and in the 70s it felt massive. 2 patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. It was an event. And the prices? They almost feel like a fantasy today. A regular hamburger could cost you between 30 and 35 cents. You could walk in with a dollar bill and walk out with a burger, a fry, and change for the jukebox. There were no calorie numbers staring you in the face, no nutrition charts on the walls. You ordered food because it sounded good and it tasted better. Your burger didn't come in a thick cardboard box. It came wrapped in thin wax paper. Do you remember that feeling? The paper would turn almost see-through as the grease soaked into it. It made the burger feel hot, fresh, and honestly, a little indulgent. But there's one part of the 1970s McDonald's experience that would shock a modern teenager: the smoke. In the early 70s, smoking wasn't tucked away in some designated back room. It was right there at your table. Between the salt shakers and the napkin dispensers sat small, round metal ashtrays, often with the corporate logo stamped right into the center. A parent would take a bite of their quarter-pounder and then light up a cigarette without missing a beat. The smell of tobacco smoke mixed with the scent of hot grease and ketchup. It sounds strange now, but if you were there, that smell is probably locked in your memory as part of the treat. Now, let's talk about the fries. This is the mystery cotton we mentioned earlier. If you swear that 1970s fries tasted better, you are 100% correct, and here is why. Beef tallow. Until the early 1990s, McDonald's and most other major chains didn't use vegetable oil to fry their potatoes. They used a blend that was primarily beef tallow, rendered animal fat. This gave the fries a richer, deeper, more savory flavor profile that vegetable oil simply cannot touch. They were crispier on the outside and fluffier on the inside. When you dipped those fries into those little pleated paper cups of ketchup, you were tasting a level of culinary soul that has since been replaced by natural beef flavoring and processed oils. The switch happened because of health concerns regarding saturated fats, but for the generation that grew up in the 70s, the real taste of a McDonald's fry died the day the tallow left the building. The 1970s also saw the rise of the drive-thru. While some places had them earlier, they became the standard for McDonald's and Burger King during this decade. It felt like living in the future. You'd pull up to a small metal speaker, hear a crackle of static, and a muffled voice would ask for your order. "Whopper, extra onions, please." "No problem. Anything else?" There were no apps to check in on, no digital displays showing your order. Sometimes they got it wrong, sometimes you had to shout, but when that brown paper bag came through the window, it felt like magic. It was the ultimate convenience for the busy 70s family. For many watching this, the 70s weren't just about eating fast food, it was about making it. Working at a fast food joint was a rite of passage for 16-year-olds. In 1975, minimum wage was about $2.10 an hour. You wore a polyester uniform that didn't breathe, a paper hat or a visor, and you worked the counter or the fry station. If you worked the fries, you remember the heat, that sudden rush when the basket came up, the hiss of the salt hitting the oil, and the smell of grease that soaked into your skin, your hair, and your clothes. You'd go home smelling like a Big Mac, and no amount of soap could wash it off. It wasn't glamorous, but it was your first paycheck, your first taste of independence. Not every fast food experience was a grab and go. In the 1970s, going to Pizza Hut felt like a genuine night out. You didn't order at a counter, you were greeted by a hostess. The atmosphere was iconic: dark wood, red checkered tablecloths, and those beautiful heavy stained glass lamps hanging over every booth. It was dim, it was cozy, and it felt special. This was also the era where the salad bar became a phenomenon. Loading up your plate with iceberg lettuce, creamy dressing, and those giant croutons felt like a massive bonus before the main event arrived. And then came the pan pizza. Served in a dark, heavy metal tray that was almost too hot to touch. The crust was thick, the edges were crisp from the oil, and the cheese was bubbling. If you close your eyes, you can probably still taste that first bite. It wasn't just fast food, it was a meal that brought the family together in a way that felt like a celebration. If Pizza Hut was the night out, KFC was the night in. A trip to see Colonel Sanders meant bringing a feast home. In the 70s, KFC, or Kentucky Fried Chicken, as we all called it back then, was a powerhouse. The original recipe was legendary, and Extra Crispy had just launched earlier in the decade. A bucket on the table meant no cooking for Mom. It meant mashed potatoes, gravy, coleslaw, and those soft, buttery biscuits. Opening that lid was a sensory experience. That smell, the 11 herbs and spices, would fill the whole house instantly. As a kid, the goal was always to reach in and grab the biggest piece before your siblings did. There was always a quiet debate over who got the drumstick and who was stuck with the wing. It was fast, yes, but it felt like a full meal in a way that modern fast food often lacks. It was communal, it was heavy, it was real chicken. Before everything became about drive-thru lanes and high-speed speakers, there were still places that held on to the drive-in magic. A&W restaurants were the kings of this. You'd pull your car into a stall, and a car hop, often on roller skates, would walk out with a heavy metal tray. They'd hook it right onto your window. You had to be careful not to bump the door, or the whole thing would wobble. But the star of the show was the root beer. It didn't come in a paper cup with a plastic lid. It came in a thick, heavy, frosted glass mug. In the mid-70s, it cost about 25 to 35 cents. On a blistering summer day, that first sip of icy cold, foamy root beer from a frozen glass hit differently. It wasn't a rushed experience. You sat in your car, listened to the radio, and took your time. It felt like summer in a glass. The prices of the 70s almost don't feel real when you look at them through a 2025 lens. In the mid-70s, a full meal, burger, fries, and a drink, would cost you around $1 and some change. Gas was 57 cents a gallon. Minimum wage was $2.10. Fast food prices fit into that world perfectly. You paid in cash, you got a handful of coins back, and you didn't have to think twice about the financial decision. And because there were no nutrition labels or wellness trends, the industry focused on one thing: taste. Burgers were cooked on flat-top grills, saturated in their own juices. Cheese was that bright, plasticky American slice that melted perfectly, and as we discussed, those fries were cooked in beef fat. It was a world of flavor over everything else. By the late 70s, the fast food wars were heating up. Burger King was telling us to have it your way, and McDonald's was doubling down on speed and consistency. The ads were simpler back then. Memorable jingles you'd hum for hours. 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. But looking back, 1970s fast food wasn't just about grabbing something quick, it was quietly shaping our routines. It was the Friday night after the game, the Sunday stop after church, the paper bag handed into the back seat on a long drive. The buildings were smaller, the menus were shorter, and the ingredients were arguably more real in their own greasy way. It slipped into our lives before smartphones and digital menus, and once it arrived, it never left. If you remember the taste of a 1970s McDonald's fry or the smell of a Pizza Hut on a Friday night, tell me about it in the comments. Was it the beef tallow? Was it the frosted mugs? Or was it just a simpler time when a 30-cent burger felt like a celebration? Thanks for traveling down memory trail with me. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next trip back in time, and check out our other videos to keep the nostalgia going. I'll see you in the next one.